Kevin Currie-Knight, good to see you.
Good to see you, Dan. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing okay. We won't tell people why we had to restart, but my decrepitude is apace.
Yeah.
Now, do you not find yourself becoming like stupid under lockdown? I mean, I'm just doing unbelievably stupid like things, just like almost somebody like they just woken up or something.
I actually find, and I want to write something about this at some point. One of the things that I drastically underestimated would affect me is the lack of ability to compartmentalize parts of your life. Like,
because you're not going somewhere and then coming home and then
right. Yeah, when you go to work, you're at work. The things around you tell you you're at work. There's just certain things you don't do at work. There's certain things you don't do at home, all that stuff. And I think that's kind of, if there's anything that's made me that sort of stupid.
Although Jeffrey Toobin has been pushing the boundaries of what one does at work.
I promise you, I have made all necessary arrangements for the Toobin
You've taken care of all the things you need to take care of before we started.
Yeah, well, it is kind of weird with the Zoom stuff and all that. Like, you can be technically watching other people with other people not actually like watching you back. It's asymmetrical.
Yeah.
And it's just, it plays havoc on meetings and things like that. I don't know if
the reason I put up these backgrounds, right?
Yeah.
Is so that people don't see all the girls dancing in the background. I mean, otherwise I'd get a pylon that would make Jeffrey Toobin's just look like nothing.
Yeah.
Actually, the reason I have this is because my room is so filthy. I'm embarrassed to have people see it.
Now, so are you working from home at this point?
Yeah. So Missouri State's open.
Yeah.
But I elected to teach from home.
Yeah.
We had to decide like in the early summer, and I really did not have a ton of confidence in what I was hearing from the university about their mitigation efforts.
Yeah.
Now, it all went in a way I wouldn't have predicted. So I was indeed, I think, right to not be very confident in their mitigation efforts, as in, I think 800 people or something have come down with this thing on campus, and that's a campus of 20,000 people. Yeah. But I also would have guessed that if that happened, the school would just go all online, and it just hasn't. I mean, these people can stomach an awful lot of, and our K through 12 is not closed either. I mean, everybody's hand wringing in New York. They're going to close again.
Yeah, we're doing this sort of kind of mealy-mouthed hybrid thing where we don't want to be fully open. So I don't quite fully get it. It's. I know some kids are going to class on certain days and then staying home on other days. I myself don't understand how it is that you're safer in terms of the spread of the virus if everyone is going to school, but just everyone's going on different days. Yeah. If everyone's going, because it's just still if someone.
Well, I think that they're trying to think that fewer people in an enclosed space for an extended period of time, just on average, is going to lower rates. But I mean, that's very abstract. And I also, I wrote about this and I've talked about this with people on Blogging Heads. I just don't understand how anybody at this point cannot see that the cost of the mitigation is now at least equal to, and if not overrunning, the cost of the actual the disease, largely because of the impact that we now know it's having on young people,
right? To
whom I think we have a special responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, from what I see, I think universities have this sort of conflict in kind of interest. On one hand, having students on campus allows them to obviously, charge the full tuition in a way that doing an online semester wouldn't. That's not a great motive, but we can't pretend the financial motive isn't an important motive if we're employees of a university.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to dismiss that motive. That equals all the employment of all the people there, including the janitors and the cafeteria workers, whose lives matter, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know about you, but one of the things that I've really disliked about the discourse around COVID and stuff like that is, number one, everyone pretends to know stuff they probably don't know. Like, I hear regular people pretending that they understand like the epidemiology
Yeah.
involved in this. Like, no, these scientists are clearly correct. And like,
Yeah.
I don't have the hubris to
Yeah.
say that. But secondly, this is a bad situation, and every solution or every outcome to it comes with huge costs and huge benefits. Shutting everything down comes with the huge cost of potentially torpedoing an economy that's already,
which means people's lives. I mean, I don't like this. Oh, it's just the economy. You know, what's money versus life, or businesses versus life? And the answer is businesses are life. I mean, that's how people feed themselves.
I know of 3, and I'm involved with a 4th business who have had to shut down over COVID. You know, like in terms of know the people who are involved, they are now out of work. My son cannot go to a particular indoor playground anymore. Like, even after this is over, that thing's shut down.
It's closed. Yeah, it's done.
Like that has an effect. Of course, the converse is the people who are like, no, we should shut down at all costs until this thing is like, until we're pretty sure that the death rate and the infection rate is going to be really, really low. And it's like, it's either way you go. It's just,
yeah.
And I just don't see people treating this with that sort of care. It's so hyper partisanized.
It's very disappointing that this in particular became so politicized, which brings us to our topic. So I totally just like flubbed the beginning of this thing because I'm supposed to do the introduction and stuff. So I'll do it now. Yeah. This is the Sophia program on meaningoflife.tv, part of the bloggingheads.tv network. I'm Daniel Kaufman. I'm professor of philosophy at Missouri State University. I also publish an online magazine called The Electric Agora, for which now one of our new writers is Kevin Currie-Knight. And why don't you tell them, just give the audience just a tiny bit about where because you're a philosopher, but you're not teaching in a philosophy department.
That's right.
So just give us the elevator pitch of what you do, who you are.
So I am a teaching associate professor at East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina. In their College of Education, I'm kind of the guy who does like the philosophy of education, history of education, dealing with questions like, what is school for? Is it for training citizens? Is it for producing workers? Is it for, stuff like that? Or issues of curriculum, like should all kids know the same stuff, learn the same stuff? Like that's the stuff we do. I also do history of education. It's kind of interesting to say that I'm a philosopher because I don't actually have any of my degrees in philosophy. So,
I didn't know that. I thought you were a philosophy PhD. I thought you were a philosophy PhD.
My bachelor's is in songwriting from Berklee College of Music. I was going to do that. I have 2 master's degrees, one in special education, one in liberal arts from University of Richmond, and then my PhD is in education. So when you do degrees in education fields, it's usually specialized. So like a lot of folks get a degree in the philosophy of education, or they get a degree in like elementary education or social studies education. I decided, for reasons that turned out to be really good, that would be horrible for my job prospects. Like I knew people who got degrees in philosophy of education, and I don't know how feasible it is to get jobs because there's not a whole lot of jobs.
It's not feasible to get jobs in philosophy departments. That's the problem. Yeah.
Right. And of course, philosophy of education is like a cross section. It's like, philosophy, and then winnow that down to philosophy of education. So I went to a program, University of Delaware, that has their degree in education, and you just kind of choose a sub area. My sub area is called curriculum and inquiry, which kind of bleeds into philosophy. And philosophy is kind of one of my loves.
It's a testament to your philosophical acumen that I thought you had a PhD in philosophy. I mean your interlocution is pretty high level for somebody who doesn't have a degree in philosophy.
Right. And then keep in mind that at age up to 21, I was pursuing a songwriting career. I was in Nashville pursuing a songwriting career. Amazing. I had no interest in academic stuff all through that time. It was like, would be a long story that we don't have to get
Amazing. Into. My daughter is a vocal performance major at the Jacobs School of Music at the University of Indiana. Right. Just started this year. I'm wearing all my Michigan gear to sort of count to so people won't think I'm a traitor to my traded to my race.
Yeah.
And I'm, of course, I know that Michigan just lost, I think, to Indiana, which of course is disturbing and contrary to the order of nature.
What was the psychology there for you?
Oh, she just texted me with just laughing at me. She just texted me like photos, like, I don't know, of like, Indiana football players and just like with ha 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 sort of underneath, which was this is all a lot of fun. I have to say, you have young children.
Yeah.
I miss having a young child for all the joys it brings. But I have to say there is something very fun about her now being kind of quasi adult and engaging with her at this level. I have to say that, this happened right before Corona hit. She and I managed to just squeak it out right before Corona, but we did all the college visits together.
Yeah.
And I have to say that in the last, let's say 5 years or so, I can't think of anything that I enjoyed more that really meant as much to me as going with her to universities. I mean, it just, look at your children and just think to yourself, I'm going to blink 3 times and I'm going to be taking them on tours of universities, because that's what it felt like. I was,
so I guess since I'm still early in my parenting career, one of the things that always bothers me is that past a certain age, you really can't control the outcome. Like, no. I mean, really from an early age, you can't. If you think you can control the outcome, you're probably deluding yourself a bit.
Yeah.
And you see kind of the opposite, like, what if my children make choices that I just know in my gut are bad choices, but obviously I can't stop them. Like I was watching, I did that article for Electric Agora on the NXIVM cult, which I'm just obsessed with.
I'm going to recommend that to people. That's a really good piece.
I would like to write a few
What a bizarre.
Yeah. So I was watching a documentary series on that following India Oxenberg, who is the daughter of the actress Catherine Oxenberg, and her journey through NXIVM. And like at one point, Catherine says, like, it dawned on me she may never get out of this thing, and I have literally no control over that. I can't make her. She's over 18. I can't make her leave this thing. Yeah. And she's convinced that it makes her happy. Now, of course, she revised that later on, and she realized, thanks to Catherine's work and others' work, that it didn't. That she just was in the dark. That she was brainwashed. But I mean, you think about that then for your own kids. At least I did. I'm like, wow. Like, what if one of my kids decides to do something like that, and I can't.
No, it's a terrifying prospect. It gets very deep fears. Also gets at questions of just how much you should impose yourself.
That's right.
On your children. I mean, my wife and I sort of from very early on agreed upon a very laissez-faire strategy.
Yeah.
We did not impose ourselves on her. Yeah. We did not even try to really convince, get her to necessarily like the things that we like.
Right. Which has got to be hard.
Or believe the things we believe especially for someone like me who has such intense enthusiasms.
Yeah.
But, I hesitate to express a philosophy of child rearing just because it's so fraught. And like you said, we really just don't know how much control we have over it. I mean, recent science seems to suggest there's very little.
There's very little.
However, I guess I do kind of have difficulty believing that, and I have to think that there's got to be something getting missed in the social science there, which is easy to happen. Because I've been teaching now for 25 years, and I just have seen too much evidence of the damage that is the result of bad parenting. And in some cases, egregiously bad parenting.
Right.
Especially in my area, it mostly comes out of very fundamentalist, right-wing, intolerant homes where the kids are essentially, they're trying to program them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I guess I think that's something, but I don't want, it's not, obviously this is not our topic, but what I was going to say was, I do have this kind of strong working hunch that very early on, you're going to find out whether your kid is sort of basically normal or not, right?
Right.
And by normal, I mean that in the purely descriptive science, sort of medical sense, right? And if they are, and if you are decent people and have a decent home, you are just going to have to trust that they're going to wind up in the end making decent decisions, right? Now, if early on you realize your child is not normal, now that's a whole different ball game, and I have no idea how I would have navigated that. The thought of it, frankly, terrifies me.
Right.
But I do think that if your kid is basically normal and you're not, poor, and you have a decent civilized household, that the kids are largely going to come out all right. Right. I mean,
Right.
Obviously there's statistical, and that the biggest thing to do that you have to do is keep your nerve, not lose your nerve.
Mm.
And overcorrect or overparent. And we just had an incident where that almost just happened. And my daughter stalked off in a huff and actually drove back to Indiana
Wow.
late at night. And there was that moment where I pushed too far and too hard because I was reacting out of fear.
Mm.
And the minute I saw myself doing it, I'm like, wait a minute.
Mm.
This is how you react when your daughter tells you she's going to go run off with her meth cook boyfriend. This is not how you react to your daughter when she says she's going to change her major, right? That's what we were fighting about, right?
Right. Right.
And so I realized, oh no, this entire spiral is because of me. I lost my nerve, and I pushed too hard, and now she's got her back up, and here we are off, right?
Yeah, you're right. She's going to dig in a bit more because
she's 18 years old.
I also believe, and I've not gotten to a point where I've had to meaningfully do this yet, so it's easier said.
Yeah, yours are too young still. Yeah,
but some mistakes have to be theirs to make.
They have to be allowed to make.
The process has to be realizing for yourself. Like, I can advise. But yeah, I mean, and again, that's easier said than done, because I know parents who've had to make really hard choices on exactly that vector, and it's excruciating. For them.
Yeah,
and I'm sure it will be excruciating for me, even though I know intellectually that that has to be a mistake they make, and they have to learn from it themselves.
Yeah, it's one of these things. It's one of the few things in your life where, even when you're doing it exactly right and it's going really well, it's still fraught.
Yeah. So I think one thing to say though is that Alison Gopnik wrote a really good book, The Psychologist / Philosopher. I don't know which she is more. I love the fact that she blurs the boundaries, but she studies kids a lot and kind of how they develop. Wrote a book called The Gardener and the Carpenter, and she puts it in some ways like this. There's a certain minimum that parents must provide for their children to grow up well. But past that minimum, it's not really up to you. Nothing you do in the large scale is going to matter. Like, yes, if you neglect your kids, if you beat your kids, if you don't have the money for proper nutrition, things like that is going to affect.
There's a way you can assuredly ruin them by your parenting,
right?
But the opposite is not the case, right?
Right. But what disciplinary approach you take, generally speaking, or if you like, every parent regrets those situations where they react in anger. And I think Allison's point is generally like, that could affect them, but it's likely not going to in the great scheme of things.
Yeah. Well, we are here, believe it or not, to talk about the election.
Let's go.
So this all started. Kevin Currie-Knight is a new on-board contributor for the Electric Agora. And, I'm starting to get to the point to where I no longer even remember the circumstances of how people are coming on board. Like, if you asked me, well, how did you hook up with Robert Gress? I couldn't tell you. Like, I've already forgotten. And I've only been talking to you for like 2 weeks. I don't even remember how the hell we got on with each other.
I submitted some shit, and then you I guess liked it enough to put it up. I mean, that's.
But what occasioned you to cold send me to?
Well, we talked about this a little bit.
Do we know somebody in common?
No, I've just been following Electric Agora, and I've watched Sophia a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the kind of thing where, like, you get tired of, I had these thoughts, and I'm like, I would really love to write something about this, but if you're an academic, the options are make it a journal article, in which case it's like, no, I don't know if I want to put in that much.
Yeah, that much work.
Or like a blog post. And I'm like, well, no one's going to read a blog post.
Yeah.
So like venues like EA or I like it. It's sort of like allows people to be like, like Montaigne's essays. No one would publish that in a journal today. He doesn't cite sources. He doesn't do a lit review. He doesn't. Anyway.
Yeah. So what happened was, Kevin came on board, and then he wrote he published several pieces, and one of them was about how he did not vote this election. And then he and I had sort of an argument about it. And the comments on this piece are amongst some of the most intense, but also quite substantial. I mean, most of the stuff you read online is just people, shitting on each other and peeing on each other and stuff. And this was, some people got a little are kind of heated about it, but there's no just you're an asshole. I mean, there's real
even the people who got heated
are writing lengthy sort of replies, and we'll obviously link to this.
I think it's a testament to the audience, by the way.
I'm sorry.
I think it's a testament to the audience that Election Agora has.
Well, and also the audience that's there. A lot of them are long standing. I mean, from the beginning, the thing's been going on for 5 years, and there's sort of like an ethos has emerged. I almost never have to ban somebody or cut or delete their comments.
Right.
It happens maybe like once a year. And it's partly because we kind of an ethos is developed within the community that people just know. They just know that there's certain things I just won't print if they put it, and that I will ban them because I have banned people, but I only have to do it once or twice.
Like in conversation, I think if everyone else that you see in the conversation is relatively civil and they're articulating arguments, it's hard to be the one guy who comes in
who just looks like a jerk.
Whereas like if you're just going on like Twitter comments where everyone's just an asshole, it's a lot easier to do that.
So this is what we came to talk about. Kevin did not vote this election. And I thought he should have, although the force and connotation of that should is actually really interesting. Yeah. Because at first I expressed it a certain way, and then when Kevin pushed back, I realized, okay, I actually don't really mean that. So that's interesting in itself. So Kevin, why don't we start with you giving a quickie sort of summary of the core elements that are obviously expressed at more length and detail in the essay. Why you did not vote this election, and maybe more generally, do you usually vote? Was this just unusual, or do you tip, or is it just your normal stance? As I might vote, I might not. I'll see how excited I am about the people.
Right.
Just go through that.
Yeah. No, this was actually the first presidential election since I was 18. So my first vote was cast in 1996. This is the first presidential election in which I have declined to vote for the president of the United States. And the reason is it's not apathy. It's not being against, democratic elections. It's not against anything like that.
And it's not because you didn't have time or the lines were too long. It's not for that kind of reason.
Honestly, this was the easiest election in the history of elections, at least since I've been alive, to vote, right? Because you have the kind of mail-in option at a larger scale.
I actually voted in person, but I didn't wait more than 15 minutes.
Well, that's probably because a lot of people had that option also.
Because I don't live in New York City. I live in Springfield, Missouri.
Yeah, right. We live in Greenville, North Carolina, so it's just, right. I mean, our polling places, usually like an elementary school, it's not long.
Yeah.
So it's not that. It's that I just could not find a candidate that I felt good about supporting. And when I vote for a candidate, I understand the idea of you're voting for Biden because you're voting against Trump. But when I vote for someone, that vote will be counted as a vote for that person, an endorsement of that person. And I guess I take that fairly seriously. So my thinking was that I don't like Trump. I didn't vote for him twice. It didn't take me long in that case to. You
did not vote for Trump twice.
Right. I didn't do it twice. And it didn't take me long because by the time you're making your choices, you know enough about Trump to know that. And I thought a bit more about Biden, but there's many things about Biden, his policies, his history, et cetera, that I don't feel good about supporting either. So then people would ask the question, well, but you should care about getting Trump out of office more than anything else. And again, I don't like Trump. I don't, I don't support Trump. But again, it goes back to that thing. When I vote for a candidate, if I voted for Joe Biden, my vote would not show up as a vote against Trump. It would show up as a vote for Joe Biden. And if Joe Biden, let's say, got a large majority of the votes, because let's say the votes were all anti-Trump votes, and they weren't really pro-Biden votes, he's not going to get up on stage the next day and say, well, I won, but I didn't get a mandate because everyone who voted for me clearly voted against Trump. He's going to say, this is a clear mandate. The people have clearly decided they like my stances. They like my policies. And I would have felt bad in that condition because that's not what my vote should have been taken for. I often vote third party. I'm kind of
you often vote third party. Is that what you said? Because I was going to ask you, do you typically vote Democrat or Republican? And your answer is, I typically vote third party.
I typically vote third party. I have voted for, in a primary, I voted for a Republican.
So like in 96, when you first voted, it was what? Clinton. It was Clinton versus.
I regrettably, I didn't know that much about politics in 96, and I voted for Ross Perot.
It was Clinton versus.
It was Clinton. Let's see.
That was Ross Perot's second run. So the first run was when Clinton ran against Papa Bush.
Right.
Perot was in.
Right.
Perot was the third party.
The third party vote.
And then
honestly, I think I voted for him for no other reason than he did those TV specials, and I thought that was really cool.
He did like those fireside chat sorts of things instead of running ads.
Yeah. I just didn't realize that he was like a flaming populist at the time. I wasn't.
I thought that was good too. I mean, I thought to myself, geez, I wish the other guys would do this kind of thing. I mean, I mean, I wasn't going to vote for him because I was perfectly happy with Bill Clinton, but
who in retrospect turns out to be one of the more respectable.
So
presidents.
then in 2000, it was Gore versus Bush.
That's right.
You voted third party.
And that I voted for Harry Brown. I had actually discovered the Libertarian Party on the eve of the election when I think it was right before the nominees, Bush and Gore, were actually the official nominees, but everyone kind of knew at that point that they would be.
Right.
And a friend of mine at a bookstore I was working at in Nashville said to me something that we were talking about politics because we were putting together a book display about like all the political books with Bush's book and Gore's book. And he asked me like, what are you going to do? I'm like, well, I don't like Bush for these reasons. I don't like Gore for these reasons. Actually, my reasons for Bush turned out precedent because I said I don't trust him when he says he's a small government conservative. I just don't trust him. The way he answers questions turned out to be pretty prescient because he oversaw a pretty large expansion of the executive branch. And I didn't like Gore for following reasons. He said, well, what are your politics? Like, what do you think? And I'm like, I don't know. And I said something like, I just want a politics where people just stay out of each other's shit. And he's like, you should look at the Libertarian Party. What?
I voted for Baby Bush against Gore. And then I voted for Kerry against Baby Bush the second time.
Yeah.
Did you vote third party in the Baby Bush versus Kerry election?
Yes, I did, and that's one of the instances where I probably shouldn't have.
And that was also the Libertarian?
The Libertarian candidate that year was a guy named Michael Badnarik, and if you don't know who he is, you're not alone, and that's probably pretty justified. He was like a software engineer who taught some college courses on like Constitution or something like that. Okay. And his big issue in a year where everyone was talking about terrorism, his big issue was Second Amendment gun rights.
Yeah, I'm not asking you this to interrogate your choices. It's more that I'm trying to get a sense. It's starting to sound to me more like you do have a party. You do vote party, but it's mostly Libertarian.
Not anymore. Over the past few years, I've kind of grown away from the Libertarian Party. I did like Gary Johnson, but a lot of purist Libertarians didn't like Gary Johnson.
So the first Obama election, was it Obama versus McCain? Was it?
Yes.
Yes. So you voted third party. Did you vote Libertarian in that one?
I did.
Okay.
And I guess the way I'll frame it is like, I like democracy in some ways enough that I'm willing to show up to a poll and vote for someone who I can sincerely vote for, even when I know that person has very little shot. Well,
not very little, zero. I mean,
zero.
It's zero. It's zero. I mean, if you're being truthful about the statistics, right?
The reason I don't say zero is because that gets you into a really circular problem. That's just a weird thing with democracy. You don't know for certain that.
But it's effectively zero
until the election comes in.
It's effectively zero, though, in the relevant sense. It's zero, right?
Right.
And then the last one was the second Obama was Obama versus
Obama versus Romney.
versus Romney. And did you vote Libertarian on that one also?
I did, and I was very enthusiastic about voting.
Was that Gary Johnson?
Because that was Gary Johnson,
Okay.
and I thought that that's just the best shot. So here's one of the interesting things about democracy on this, is that if I recall right, and I've talked to other people, and they remember this as well, Gary Johnson in certain polls in certain states was doing very well. He was polling in double digits, which is unheard of for a Libertarian candidate. And even in like polls of young people, he was often outplacing Trump and Clinton. But all of us kind of veteran voters who have voted third party before know that there's this really interesting coordination game that goes on. And we kind of knew that this was not going to materialize in the election, because what happens is when you show up to the poll, it's not really as much about your preference anymore. It's about, well, which of the two candidates who have the best probability do I not like? I'm going to vote the opposite. Yeah. So like in an ideal situation, Johnson would have polled in at 20%, but people aren't willing to do that because they know too many people who they think are not going to vote Gary Johnson.
Yeah, right? There's also, I mean, there's the further complication in that, you might vote for, let's say, Gary Johnson, even knowing he's going to lose the election. I mean, knowing that with 100% certainty effectively, because in certain states where he's strong, that might get some libertarians elected, in state government, in state houses, in Congress. And so, I mean, there's reasons down ticket sometimes to support somebody who is not going to win at this level, because you want to start trying to seed state legislatures and stuff. Now, I have not kept enough track of how successful the libertarians have been in that regard, although my impression is not very.
This election was a huge step back.
No, in any election, I'm not getting the sense that the libertarians have succeeded
1%
in seating local state houses.
And
stuff to try and sort of build from the bottom up, so that eventually then you do get a viable national candidate.
I mean, my rationale generally for there's three rationales for generally having voted Libertarian. Although in other elections I have voted either major party or like Green Party. I've done that as well. But those not in presidential elections. My rationale for tending to vote third party has been threefold. Number one, again, I have this strong inclination that I will not vote for someone who doesn't align enough with me that I would feel good if my vote decided the outcome. So the Libertarian candidate has usually been that person. Secondly, I don't like having a two-party system, and I have this kind of very naive belief that if I were to vote, I at least want to make sure that my vote might help set up more visibility for a third party.
Now, what is it that let me ask you about this, and I'm going to interrogate all of this at some point, but this one, there's sort of it seems like a natural place to sort of pause and ask you. Yeah. What exactly is so great, you think, about multi-party, like parliamentary? So let me give you an example, right? Yeah. Israel has a multi-party parliament, right? Yeah. And the result of it is that the country is relatively evenly split between mainstream left and mainstream right. Mm-hmm. And what this means is that lunatic, deranged, fringe third parties wind up controlling the government, right? Because they tip the scale. So I don't know, and look, you can look at parliamentary countries, systems in Europe. I mean, Italy has a parliamentary system. In other words, I don't know what exactly is so wonderful about multi-party parliamentary systems versus a two-party system like ours.
Well, there's a few things. Well, first of all, I don't really know enough about Israeli politics to know kind of the truth of
the religious parties, whoever it is, can make a sweet deal with the ultra-Orthodox, wind up winning the elections because it's otherwise very close 50-50, right?
But they wouldn't be able to achieve anything without creating cross-party coalitions. Right?
Well, no, they don't have to create a cross-party coalition. They just have to take on some fringe religious party that pushes them over, right? So that's what happened. That's how Benjamin Netanyahu has stayed in power now for whatever, God knows how many years, not because he has such a
strong. You're saying the fringe parties have disproportionate.
The fringe parties wind up effectively controlling
because they can help decide which major party.
Yeah, because they're the kingmaker, right? I mean, and that's built in, right? That's a feature.
Right.
It's not a bug. That's a feature of a parliamentary system where you have a relatively evenly split population. Now, where you have a fragmentary population, what you're going to get is governments that never represent right a substantial number. So I'm not understanding what is so great about, other than it gets people to be able to say, I'm being represented, which is very important to you. And that's something I'm going to interrogate later because I don't quite understand that view. But
you don't understand democracy as a view where
I don't understand why it's constantly all about you. I don't understand why it's all about you. No, I don't.
Well, why, but you don't understand why my vote is all about me, though?
No, I don't.
It seems like that's the idea of a vote, is that I'm supposed to cast a ballot for the person that I would like to be a representative.
I would contest that. I would contest that in effective reality. What you described to me is the sort of thing I would expect to sort of read in kind of like a very simplistic treatment that you might give to a 6-year-old about what democracy is. But in terms of, if you ask me what it really is, it involves, I would say it barely resembles what you described.
So if I rephrase what you've just said, we lie to 12-year-olds when we give them this idea that democracy is great and wonderful, a way to put our representation, but we adults know the way it really is. That just doesn't bode well for any enthusiasm towards democracy, does it?
Yeah, I don't think it's a matter of, we'll get to this, but I don't think this is a matter of enthusiasm. I think it's a matter of just what one does, like a gazillion other things that are just what one does when one is of a certain sort of thing, right? I mean, I don't interrogate philosophically, why why I get up in the morning and go to work. I don't interrogate philosophically why. And so we'll get to this, but right now I just want to sort of ask about what is so great about a multi-party system as opposed to a two-party system.
The other thing about a multi-party system that is of benefit is that when you have a two-party system, the candidacy, the campaigns have everything to gain from being negative towards the other side rather than positive about themselves. Because if your only two options are me or the other guy, the best way to get your vote is to be against the other guy and to scare you from the other guy, because then your only other option is me. Instead of being positive about my positions, because my goal is to become a coalition of as many voters as I can who have conflicting interests and stuff like that. So if I tell you what my positions are, I may disaffect some of the coalition, but if I just push you away from the other guy, I can get a lot of folks with a lot of different interests without having to say much positive. And frankly, I think we saw a lot of that with Biden. I haven't talked to many Biden supporters who really know anything meaningful about his positions because, frankly, he was never asked. And he did a better job than most of being a very positive campaigner. He didn't do a lot of anti-Trump ads that were blatantly anti-Trump. But even then, well,
this election really wasn't an issues election, right? I mean, this
is a personality election.
And this election had to do entirely with the fact. Look, this election was a 2020 election. This was not a 2016 through 2020 election. This was a 2020 election, meaning the only things that mattered in this election were coronavirus and civil unrest, right? Those are the only things that mattered. Yeah. And the chief question on the table was, what is the bare minimum qualities in a person that are required for leadership during times of national emergency, right? That was really the only issue, right? Yeah. And in my view, some people, the country broke down between people who could see that clearly and look it straight in the face and be honest with themselves that this is what this was about, versus and sufficiently take seriously the gravity of the situation, and those who for various reasons in many different ways occupied what I would call self-serving and comforting fictions that had nothing to do with what actually was really at stake. I would include you in that, by the way, making this all about all sorts of, in my view, somewhat juvenile abstractions about democracy, as opposed to who's going to be in charge of the country while we're having race riots and while we're having a global pandemic? Are we going to have the guy who goes up on TV and makes jokes about banging novels when he's supposed to be talking about death statistics? Or are we going to let the guy who is at least a quasi-normal human being, who behaves like a normal human being, who's going to, when there's a pandemic, realize that he's got to coordinate with the states because you have a country with porous borders between all the states? I mean, so to me, this was the people who either voted against Biden or who didn't vote like you really were never confronting the reality of what the election was actually about, is my view. I
mean, one of the problems, and I know you will probably hate that I'm going to do this, but the problem is that when I'm talking to people who are pro-Trump, they would have said almost exactly the same things, and they would have just switched who you mean.
Yeah, but so what? We're not in middle school. We're not in middle school. We can actually evaluate the quality of the statements on either side. So sure. I would like to hear an equivalent.
I guess what I'm saying is what you see is so obvious was not so obvious to convince almost 50% of the voters. This was a narrow margin. And when you're in that situation, I think it should behoove all of us to have a bit of epistemic humility with that and to say, okay,
again, you're entirely talking in abstractions. You're just, you swim in a sea of abstractions. I've yet to hear a single concrete thing out of you. It's all about principles and what if I was saying, if this was viewed as me saying this. I haven't heard anything about the actual reality, right? And that's what I object to. And look, this is hardly just you. I mean, this is why I find philosophers in general amongst the most useless analysts of these sorts of things, because they're completely untethered from reality. Again, I said something very specific. During a global pandemic, during a national emergency, you cannot have a person in charge of the country who behaves like X, Y, and Z. Now, I want to hear the equivalent point about Biden. Not abstractions, he might start a war sometime, somewhere. When I'm talking, I made a very specific claim. You cannot have a vulgar, deranged lunatic in charge of your country when you're in the middle of national emergency.
It's difficult for me to respond.
What's the reply?
Right. It's difficult for me to respond because not only are you saying I can't respond with any idea couched in principle, but you're saying I can't respond to any appeals to policy.
Well, how about just reality on the ground? How about just reality on the ground? What's actually happening? Civil unrest in cities across the country, pandemic that's now killed up to 200,000 people.
Sure. Reality.
That's what the election is about, right?
Yeah.
So what is the answer to why the two quote for Biden? Explain to me how Biden is much of a menace, given that reality, as Trump.
Sure. Okay. So Trump is an ass, but a president does more than give speeches and acts as a figurehead. But if we want to talk about speeches and figurehead, we should at least pay attention to the idea that Joe Biden is a 78-year-old who, at best, is exhibiting the signs of cognitive decline that you would expect of a 78-year-old. Some people say he's going through dementia. I'm not convinced of that. I've heard people who have experience with that say, this is obviously not that. To have a 78-year-old in that who fairly regularly in speeches, you could replace Trump's kind of abrasive comments with Biden's memory lapses, frankly, not knowing what amendment to refer to when you refer to our right to free speech, or not knowing who the candidate you're running against is because you call them by the wrong name.
So you think that relative to civil unrest
is going to inspire a ton of confidence?
Relative to imminent civil unrest and a pandemic that requires not only coordination among the states, but also a constant sustained support for public morale. You're saying that what you described about Biden is equally concerning as to what I described about Trump. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I don't think equally concerning, but I think given all of the other considerations, policy considerations that I can't understand why you don't think are relevant to deciding who to vote for.
So you don't think this was election?
They're not so much better that they correct for all of that.
So you don't think this election was entirely about the pandemic and the civil unrest? You think this was a foreign policy election?
We are not electing a president for the next 6 months. We're electing a president for the next 4 years. And
right, but I'm asking what this election. I'm asking what this election was actually about.
I think that we're electing someone for 4 years. And if you look in the Constitution under the duties of the president, you'll find more than give speeches and unite the country. Yeah. You find a lot of other things there. You find signs bills into laws. You find, kind of elects cabinet members and advisors. And yeah, I do think that Biden is better than Trump on a lot of those
and
things.
You think Trump, you like the people that you like the people that Trump would attract around himself to work for him as much as equally to what the sort of people Biden would get around himself.
I actually like them both. I actually dislike them both equally for different reasons.
You dislike them both equally, okay?
For different reasons. Not for the
same. So you think that there are Biden counterparts to
here's
Jared Kushner and Trump Jr., and you think that there are Biden counterparts to that who would be occupying positions in the White House?
I think that when you look at the type of people who were doing things for Barack Obama with the Joe Biden vice presidency, the type of people who we have every reason to think Biden is going to nominate, what you see is policies that were not appreciably different from many of Trump's policies, with the difference that they just seemed more respectable because those folks talked in very complete sentences and very well thought out paragraphs, and we just sort of ignored it.
Okay. Well, look, so part of this, this breaks down into several things. One thing is,
let me just stress, because I know that listeners are going to get the impression that I'm defending Trump here. Again, I didn't vote for him.
No, you didn't vote for Trump. I don't think you're defending Trump.
I didn't, right?
I don't think you're defending Trump. And understand that in blogging heads, there is a very strong pro-Trump contingent in the comments that are not going to be intimidated at all of saying what they want. So it's fine.
I appreciated that discussion you had with Spencer and Robert, even though I disagree with Spencer's reasons for supporting Trump. I appreciate that you had someone on who you could have that intelligent dialogue with. Yeah. No,
and I'm more interested in the structure of this whole problem. I mean, because when it's going to come down to things that you just fundamentally disagree on, that you're not going to convince the other person because they're not matters of fact. They're not things that are independently verifiable. So I just want to get clear on the sort of the structure of this, right? So look, one thing about not voting is because in this election, I thought the two were equivalent, right? Equivalently bad, and I don't want to vote for equal bads. Now that breaks down into two further questions, right? So one thing is, are they really equivalently bad? And I obviously disagree with you about that. What you've just described to me doesn't fit the reality that I see.
Let me just also re-stress, because this is a point it's a point that can be missed. When I say they're equivalently bad, I mean they're equivalently bad in different ways.
Yeah, in different ways.
They're equivalently bad in the same way.
The ledgers, the net result is equally bad. Yes. It just may be that this guy is worse in terms of his behavior and the personality, and the other guy's worse because he'll put a bunch of neocon hawks into the State Department that are going to make us invade another country.
Said, Dan.
Stuff like, well, whatever. But that's that's the sort of thing that people have said, right? Yes. I mean, they pointed out that
and they're right.
Trump's not gotten us into any wars,
they're right.
Which is true. So that's one side of it. Is people can then disagree over whether they're equally bad or not. I obviously don't think it's even close, but that again will come down to perceptions that we're just not going to agree on. Right. But the other thing is then the more general question about not voting, just sort of in general, right? And I actually this was
where we disagreed, that I didn't expect originally when I gave you the article.
Yeah, you expected it to be all about how horrible Trump is and how could you not see it, right? But that's not my main thing. And actually your description of your history of voting actually to me is very interesting, and it actually bolsters what I was originally thinking, and that is I understand when you have a very extreme set of circumstances saying, gosh, neither of these people are both awful, right? Hillary Clinton versus Trump. I mean, that is a hold your nose and take anti-nausea medicine, right? Yeah. But you've been doing this the entirety of your voting history, which tells me
Most of it.
Everybody to you is an extreme situation. Now, to me, when I hear your voting history, and then you give me whatever your things about not voting, what I want to know is, does it not occur to you that you yourself are so eccentric and out of touch with the community you belong to that you really ought to be concerned more with why you're so weird rather than why 20 years worth of presidential candidates
haven't been good enough.
And all the hundreds of millions of people voting for them haven't been good enough for you. I mean, what the fuck is so special about you, man?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, so there's two things to say about that. Number one, like I said in the piece, there's this weird thing with democracy where it's both a way for citizens to voice their preferences and a way to aggregate those preferences into a total to decide a winner. So there's two ways to approach voting. There's the way of like strategically where I want to figure out who the candidate is I can support, who I think is most likely to win other people's support, and then I'll vote that way, which is the way you're kind of advocating for. Or there's a way to say, no, I'm going to take this literally in the sense of when I vote for a candidate, it gives me a list of preferences. And I'm going to vote my preference. And if my horse doesn't win the day, that's fine because it's about citizens voicing their preferences and then aggregating those totals. I don't think the strategic way is wrong, as I also say in the piece. I just think it's a quirk of democracy that you have both of these competing ways to see what you're doing. And again, if I look at it as if I vote for someone and somehow, some way, my vote actually carries the day and decides, let's say, the state of North Carolina, I want to make real sure that I can't go back and say, no, that's not what I meant. I really prefer this person. I just voted for that person because they were the least noxious of the group. So again, I don't think the strategic way is wrong. I just think that's one way to look at what you're doing.
I mean, what you're describing to me, I'm thinking about your history of voting, which, if we're characterizing it truthfully, is voting for people who you know will lose on purpose, right?
On purpose, not in the sense of I know they will lose, therefore I will vote for them.
No, but voting on purpose for people who you know are going to lose every single election, right? Yeah. That tells me, what that sounds to me is like, and given your characterization, is that you view voting as primarily performative. And I find that incomprehensible.
If you look at it strategically, though, also, Dan, you got to square up to the fact that your vote will almost certainly decide nothing. Right. So,
but that doesn't help your point. That doesn't help your point because your whole point is, oh my God, if it turned out that my vote mattered, then I would have to stand there and say, it's like, but that's never going to happen because your vote never does matter.
It doesn't help my point, but it harms yours. Because if you're saying what you should do when you vote is choose the person who you think has the best chance that you like the most. What I'm saying is, Dan, if you think your vote is going to do anything significant towards that person, you should probably just stay home.
So you don't think there are any collective effort activities?
There are
no collective efforts,
but your individual vote. And here's the other quirk of democracy: the collective effort is made all the harder because we vote by secret ballot. If you could figure out a way to break that coordination mechanism and say, I know for certain that this many people are going to vote for Joe Biden, and therefore I'm going to contribute a vote to that total. First of all, your vote still doesn't matter very much. But secondly, then and only then could you say you're justified fully in that strategy. For all you know, a lot of people could say, I'm going to vote Biden and then go into the polls and vote Trump. I mean, we've seen the pollings have been wrong. So a lot of people are either saying they're voting for Biden and lying about it, or they're just not saying anything. But that's a real inhibitor of that collective action problem, is the fact that we have secret ballots. Because if we didn't have secret ballots, I bet a lot more people would have voted for Gary Johnson, at least because he's polling high. But we have secret ballots. You can vote however you want when you get in there. But I mean, really, if you think that voting is this strategic thing where you're trying to pick a leader and you should vote for who you think has the best numerical chance that you like the most, I'm just going to remind you that your vote is infinitesimal. And you live in a state, if I'm not mistaken, that's a pretty steady stronghold, or has it changed?
Well, I mean, my state
Missouri has usually been a Republican stronghold, right?
Well, not usually. I mean, usually
been
Missouri has been split, right? I mean, Missouri was one of those, determiners, right? Because the cities, Kansas City and St. Louis, were Democrat, and the smaller cities and the rural areas were Republican. I mean, when I first moved here, which was in 2000, we had a Democratic governor. So it's in the recent years has been pretty consistently Republican, partly because of the decline of the two big cities.
Right. But even then, I mean, numerically, your vote has.
But whether it stays that way, I guess, it's funny that as you were saying all of this, I've heard philosophers say a lot of these things. I mean, there's whole literature in philosophy about your vote, whether your vote counts and whether that means you should do it or not. And it always made me think, A, gosh, these are the times that I understand why everybody hates philosophy. B, it reminds me of why I hate philosophy.
Are you sure you're in the right profession?
Well, I would love to be in my profession if the people in it weren't such a bunch of creeps and didn't stop being such a bunch of eccentric weirdos, right? I mean,
I get that.
To me, I don't philosophize unless there's something really worth it, right? And I just don't.
By the way, I should mention the only reason I sound like a philosopher here is because you are asking me to articulate reasons.
I know, of course.
I don't think about this. I'm not like this ultra kind of like detached mathematical thinker about.
Yeah, but your considerations are all very philosophical considerations, right? I mean, they're not practical considerations, right? They're not, the way I look at this is sort of, there's a number of things that one just does by virtue of what one is, right? I mean, and this is true across the sectors of one's life. And I guess some of them are worth interrogating.
Voting is worth interrogating?
I'm sorry?
You don't think voting is one of those that's worth interrogating?
I think no, actually, no, I don't. I don't think voting is any more worth interrogating than grocery shopping, right? I mean, in the sense that
grocery shopping isn't worth interrogating because I have to eat. I have to get food.
Listen, don't even. I hate to tell you this, but philosophers want to interrogate the shit out of grocery shopping. I mean, you've got the ethical vegans who are going to come in on this. You've got the sustainable agriculture people who are going to come in on this. Listen, I have this argument all the time. My response to ethical veganism is that there's nothing wrong with my 6-year-old's tuna sandwich, right? And the point is to sort of confront the interrogation with the mundanity and normality of something that everybody does, and that there's no chance in 10,000 years you're going to ever turn into some great crime, right? That's just not going to happen, right? Why? Yeah. Because the human bounds of common sense can only be abused so far, right? And before they break. Yeah. And I feel a little bit similarly about this. I mean, it's just sort of I just
don't see why you think that voting is not worth
when you live it because part of it's funny. I asked my father. So both of my parents come out of the Holocaust. My father was born in 1928 in Germany, and his family fled in 1933 due to the rise of the Nazis. My mother was born in Transylvania, which then was Hungary, and her family was shipped off to the concentration camps. And I actually asked my parents about this not voting thing, and they actually expressed tremendous hostility towards you. They said to me, "This young man is such a spoiled brat. He has no idea how lucky he is, right, to live in a place where you actually can vote, right?"
So they think that
they reacted to your not voting as the kind of reaction that only a person in an extraordinary luxurious situation could even imagine, let alone they were offended. They were offended by your not voting.
So I would ask them the following question. You lived in societies that did not have the freedom of speech to say controversial shit. If I decide on any given day not to say controversial shit just because, would you also then say the reason you just didn't want to say controversial shit today is because you're so privileged that you don't realize how fortunate you are to live in a society?
You think that's a good analogy? You think that's a good analogy?
Yeah.
I think it's an idiotic analogy.
Okay.
I mean, come on. We're talking about one of the basic functions, right? You know, you ask somebody, what is it to be a citizen in a democracy, right? This is what I mean by there are just things that one does because of what one is, right? And I mean, I guess, you know, my parents view voting as a tremendously precious resource, right? It's something that
well, then they should vote, of course, but
right, and that to not vote, there should be some extraordinary reason, and the reason can't be, well, this 35th person that I could have voted for over the last 20 years also doesn't meet my standards like all the others. Yeah. They find that sort of precious and kind of unmoored from the world a little bit.
Yeah. And
I guess I agree with that. I think
my reason of not preferring one of the two major candidates is probably a good reason not to vote. But I mean, on your view, or maybe their view, would they have been happy if I did a coin flip?
So this gets us on another one of the things that we've been batting back and forth. So, you know, and I'm sure a lot of people do this, right? So you go in to vote, right? And there's the ballot. You got this piece of paper, right? Mine was on a piece of paper. I know some people are doing it on touchscreens. And, you know, there's the president and the vice president. Then there might be, you know, a congressman or somebody but then you go down and it's people, you haven't the faintest idea who these fucking people are, right? I mean, you just don't know, right? So what do? I just fill in all the Democratic boxes, right? Down the line, right? Which is not quite flipping a coin, but it's in the orbit of what you're talking about.
It's a brand. You like the brand.
Now, you may ask me, well, why do I do that? Well, why do I do that, right? Well, because I live in a super hyper right-wing fundamentalist Christian part of the country. And I think that the ethos of those people has a malignant effect on my community and my environment.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I'm going to vote down the line for the people who roughly belong to the orientation that is least like that and that is least likely to favor or pursue those kinds of things.
So how is that different than what I'm doing? Because you're voting for them without...
You're not voting at all.
Well, no, but you also took me to task for voting libertarian because I'm not voting strategically in a way where I'm voting for people.
Well, I am voting strategically.
So you think that your vote is going to make it much more likely that the Democrat gets
Democrats can win. I mean, Democrats can win in Missouri, and they do win in Missouri. I mean, you know, they don't win all the time, but Democrats. I mean, listen, some of the more powerful people in the Senate and the House are from Missouri.
But unless I misunderstood you, part of what you were saying was that you vote Democratic because, in some sense, you also want to send a message that, like.
No, I'm not interested. Okay. I have no interest in messages.
Okay,
I have no interest in messages. I don't vote performatively. It's not a form of signaling. I don't care what people think I've represented. I don't even understand that scruple. Yeah. That hypothetical, what if somebody had thought that I had said blah, blah, blah. I don't even understand. Worrying about that is something I don't understand. I'm very...
But for someone who puts so much value on democracy that you want us to vote just because it's something citizens do, you take an awfully dim view of democracy.
I don't think I took. Did I ever say I put such great value on it?
View of it. Like,
I simply said that it's what one does,
right? And you're
when
saying
one is a citizen of a democracy,
right? But then you're saying like it's not your job when you vote to like vote for the person that you really like. If that person's not someone who can really win, your vote is to kind of you suck it up and you vote for the least.
One votes
candidate because that's just what you do. But then I find it so hard to square with your reverence for the idea of voting. Like,
I don't think I had any reverence. I mean, you're ascribing to me sentiments that I don't have. Now, certainly my parents
very angry
do.
that I didn't vote. If
My
that's
parents,
not,
I
if that's not,
don't give a shit if you didn't vote. I'm always intense about whatever I argue. I'm intense, but I mean, I don't think you should have been forced to. I don't think you should be shunned for not having done it. It's not like I refuse to be your friend because you didn't. I mean, I don't care in that sense. I mean, you do what you like. I just find it weird. And I think it's interesting to talk about why.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, let me ask you this, either for you or maybe for your parents, although that's unfair because I wouldn't want you to answer.
My parents' reasons are very different from mine. They would idealize.
Do you believe that I'm performing my citizenly duties more if I would have gone in and voted for Trump than if I stayed home and not voted for Trump or voted for Biden? Because it sounds like, given what you're saying, the answer would be yes. And that's really weird.
If you're asking me, I have more respect for Spencer's decision than yours. Yes.
Oh, okay. That's
I do.
Interesting. Okay.
I do. I think Spencer's wrong.
Right.
But I understand what he did. I still don't understand yours. I mean, I don't understand somebody for whom 25 years of candidates, none of them are good enough, who doesn't say, that's probably a problem on my end, right? Like, I don't understand.
I don't see it as a problem. Why is it a problem that my preferences don't line up with other people's?
Well, it's a problem.
Why should I subject my preferences to what other people want and say, not only am I going to vote, but because my preferences are so weird, I'm going to suppress them so that I can vote for the least noxious candidate because at least I might pick a winner.
Because it's the nature of all social existence. Now, maybe you're such a libertarian that you sort of don't believe even in sort of social life, right? But as far as I can tell, as far as I've understood and have experienced in 52 years I've been alive, is that, even fucking marriages, right? I mean, there are probably almost as many ways in which my wife can't stand me as in the ways she can, right? I mean, marriages are very practical, grounded, blood and soil sorts of blood and earth sorts of things, right? There and the ones that last are the people who understand this, right? And the ones who have these utopian, it's love, get divorced 6 times because every single time the spouse is not quite up to their standards. Whereas I look at it quite the opposite way, right?
I guess I just don't see too much analogy between choosing.
Well, I think it's directly analogous, and the direct analogy goes like this, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is that in any social any social environment, there's probably nobody who I'm going to agree with even 80% on 80%, right? I find that in the company that I keep, because I don't insist on ideological conformity of my friends, right, and relatives who I'll talk to, I find that in the company that I keep, the levels of agreement are probably between 40 and 60, one way or the other, right? So I just don't have it. I guess part of what my problem with your approach is that I think your expectations are unmoored or untethered from the actual world you occupy. And so I do think that you're kind of living in kind of an artificial space that you've created on the basis of a lot of abstract principles, all of which I would contest, about what it is to live in a social environment, what it is to be in a community with other people, what it is to be to self-govern, what it is to be in a participatory enterprise. I just don't understand any of your scruples along any of those lines.
Well, that's another area we definitely disagree. Is I think you've made the analogy before of well, it's not an analogy, but it's just what you do. If you live in a democracy, you vote.
There are things that one does, given what one is. Right?
And to my mind, the way I see it, I live in this place that decided long before I got here that democracy was going to be the way that we choose our leaders. It's not even the way we choose our rules. It's the way we choose our leaders who will then go on to choose the rules. And as such, we would really like people to participate in this process. It's a process that's available to you, but it's not a process that everyone needs to participate in. Clearly, we don't have a law that mandates voting. And I just don't see that, if I don't like the candidates on offer, I'm fully willing to accept the idea that the winner of the election will not be someone I like, generally speaking. It's not like I'm not willing to accept that. I see it as more like, here's our decision-making process. You can participate. It's sort of like a town meeting. If you live in a town that has those kind of town hall meetings and you can show up and you can participate. I just think it would be a bizarre step to say, because we have that town hall here and that's how we collect ideas, you should feel some moral obligation to participate, even if you have nothing that you care to offer.
Again, I'm not talking about moral obligations, and I don't, talk of obligations in the absence of any talk of sanction is entirely empty talk. And so, as far as I'm concerned, you deserve neither legal nor social sanction for not voting. So we're just talking about different conceptions of what we're doing. And I'm just saying, I don't understand yours. That's all.
Then the question for you is, do you think I should feel bad for not voting?
No.
Okay. No. Okay.
No.
Then I'm struggling to figure out what exactly you're saying, because clearly you think I'm breaching something.
No, I think what we're doing is I'm taking you seriously enough to take your view of of this enterprise, the citizenship / participatory democracy exercise. I'm taking it seriously enough to sort of ask whether it's a viable conception. And I don't think it is, right? I'm not doing this because
you don't think anything follows from that.
I'm not doing this because I want to browbeat you into voting next time. Like that's not my aim at all.
Right.
Or
you'd be one of the
into
few
it or whatever. I really don't understand. And look, this goes along with a whole raft of sort of views I have on a whole bunch of things. Same thing. I would say the similar things about ethics. To me, politics is 100% entirely practical. It's not an expression of anything. This is not the politics of ancient Greece.
Right.
This is the politics of.
So you don't think that choosing a president based on immigration or foreign policy connects with ethics in a meaningful way?
I think that the ways in which all of these things actually wind up getting done and implemented involve so many actors who bear so many pieces of the responsibility that I don't think that's can straightforwardly be answered that way. No, I don't. I do think that when one is a part of, look, I mean, to a certain extent, I guess what I'm saying is I don't actually think you're part of the communities that you belong to, right? I think
okay. Yeah, that's the part
through as a matter of praxis, not as a matter of self-declaration or what you think or how you view yourself or how others view you. I'm just saying, as a matter of fact, as a citizen in a participatory democracy, barring extraordinary circumstances, which this can't be since you've done it like 20 times now, right? To me, the voting is just part of what one does, barring extraordinary circumstances. And I just don't, and all the reasons you've given are not reasons that I understand, because they're all features, not bugs.
Why is voting? So let me ask you then, why is voting to you a part of what one just does if you live in a
participatory because we live in a participatory democracy where essentially we self-govern.
But I live in a society that also gives me the right, and in some sense says it values petitioning the government and
sure.
But I don't.
Voting's not the only one.
To do that.
Voting's not the only one. It's just the most rudimentary.
No, but I don't feel obligated to do that. I guess, like, how is voting different than a right that we have that we can exercise, but that we can also not exercise? How is
it wouldn't be. It would only be different in terms of how basic or fundamental it is. It wouldn't be different otherwise in kind.
And you think voting is more basic than speaking?
I think in a participatory democracy, an adult, the primary attribute of an adult citizen is that they're a voter. Yes, I do.
So you think that voting is more basic than speaking? Okay.
No. More basic than engaging in activism. Yes, I do.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I completely disagree.
Yeah.
I
And if you look at just the numbers of people, I mean,
more.
look at the numbers of people. I understand that, but again, I'm not really talking about views or opinions. I'm just sort of getting down at what the actual reality is, right? So far more people vote than engage in activism, right? Activism reflects a tiny percentage of the population, right? Most people just get along with their lives, and voting is part of what they do alongside other basic things that they do in their lives as citizens.
I don't think it's obvious. If you take the amount of time it takes someone to vote and you had them do something else that would benefit the community, or you had them do something like, write an op-ed or join a petition or something like that, I don't think it's obvious that voting is the better way to affect change.
I didn't say that. I just said it's one of the basic things one does.
Then I don't understand. I don't understand why it's more basic.
Well, because what one is a citizen in a participatory democracy.
Yeah, but what one is,
which involves self-governance,
liberal democracy and liberal rights. See, I like, we're a citizen.
I didn't say, but see, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, I'm not saying that there's never any good reason to not vote. I'm just saying I haven't heard any good ones from you. That's all. I haven't heard any good ones from you. Now, I think the lines being too long is a better reason than any reason you've given me so far.
Okay. So not being able to decide for a candidate that I think I want to be my leader is a pretty bad reason not to.
On the basis of unreasonable scruples, yes, it's a bad reason.
And it's a it's a worse reason than
not being able to spend 3 hours standing online. Yes, I do, because I think it's ultimately a practical activity.
I know you say you're not doing this, but I just find it hard to square your much more pessimistic view of democracy and what we do when we do it with your incredulity that someone would not vote even if they don't have a preferred candidate. I'm not saying that I don't understand not voting if you don't have a preferred candidate. I'm not understanding your grounds for not having a preferred candidate. Right.
And that's bolstered by the story you told me about how not a single candidate for the last 25 years has been a preferred candidate. Now, what that tells me is a lot about you and nothing about the candidates, right? Is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. It's just, it's not very forceful.
Well, it's not intended to be forceful because I'm not trying to convince you to do something, right? I'm just simply saying, you wrote an essay saying, here's why I didn't vote.
Yeah.
And my answer is, I don't get those reasons, right? Now, why don't I get those reasons? Well, here, because, voting is a pretty normal, mundane thing that one does as a citizen, as a participatory democracy. Sure, I can imagine reasons not doing it. They would either have to be matters of real inconvenience or some tremendously overriding. But then when you tell me, well, I haven't done it for the last 25 candidates, my answer is, okay, well, then clearly.
It's not that I haven't done it, Dan. It's not that I haven't gone to the polls and voted. It's that I haven't voted for the candidates you think are the viable candidates. And the majority of citizens agree with you. And again, I'm just saying that when I look at democracy, I don't think what I'm doing is trying to pick the
No, that's a fair point.
Trying to express.
No, that's a fair point. And you know what? I'm realizing now that really there's two separate issues that I've conflated that it's a mistake. One is the issue of not voting. And then the other issue is voting on purpose for people who you know are going to lose. And those are separable. And we need to have another program for the second one because I may want to say similar things, but they obviously would have to be changed.
This is a great discussion. I mean, one of the things I'll definitely say that I think is great about a discussion like this is that these are the discussions that another thing that disgusts me about the 2020 election cycle that are so few and far between to have. I have never seen an election cycle that has been more not only partisan, but so willingly partisan.
People get too upset, man.
Even make an effort to understand the other side on the other side's terms. And that's important. So when I talk to Biden supporters or anti-Trumpers, it's like they say, yeah, I want to understand why the other side can be so racist. It's like, well, that's not trying to understand the other side. You've already framed that they're racist. You want to understand why they're racist. They would disagree. And then when you talk to people on the other side, they're like, I want to understand why people on the left just hate America so much. Like you're framing the issue. You don't want to understand anything. You just want a confirmation of your priors. And that's another reason why it's like, I don't feel at home in any of these circles.
No, we can agree that our civil discourse is a goddamn cesspool, and that, the people I've made, gotten in bed with, there's a
proverbially, of course, remember Tubin.
And I am wearing pants. There is a segment of the people I've gotten in bed with that are just absolutely appalling, and anybody who knows my work will know I've been very harsh on them. Part of the reason, when you talk about strategic voting, you're almost a little bit naive in your characterization of. I mean, my voting is fucking strategic, like in layers, right? So one of the things that I think is going on in our policy that's so disturbing is that both parties are having a struggle in which a substantial and intense portion of their electorate want to sort of change the country from a liberal ethos to something else, right? And I, in my view, allowing Trump to stay in office would make it impossible for liberalism to win that fight in either party, because Trump is such a radicalizing influence. Trump radicalizes everyone. He radicalizes the Republicans and he radicalizes the Democrats.
I'll definitely.
Trump is to our system of politics like Hamas is to the Israeli-Palestinian problem, right? He just create, and so part of my reason for me wanting to make sure Trump is out is because I still think that there is some remote chance that we might stay a liberal country.
Yeah.
But we have to allow these parties, it has to be allowed, the fight has to be allowed to play out. And Trump simply loses the fight for one side and wins it for the other. And then it's just a matter of whether we're going to get right-wing illiberals or left-wing illiberals.
To some degree. I mean, there's two things that I'd say in response to that. The first is that one of the hidden benefits of having Trump in office, and I cringe when I say benefits because it's so indirect, is that for the first time in a long time, at least since George W. Bush, we have had a media that has been relentlessly critical, and justifiably so, of a president. When Barack Obama was in office, there were things that the media, had Trump done them or had George W. Bush done them, and a lot of them were things George W. Bush would have done, the media would have been very critical, and they would have been right to. Trump is such an asshole that he, almost like a magnet, gets the media in there to do their fucking job. They just didn't do their job for 8 years. And again, this is a hidden remote benefit of Trump, but if you want a liberal society, that's the sort of thing you also need to have.
Yeah.
You need to have it. And secondly, I'll just say that I do believe Trump is a catalyst of polarization. I think back to Obama's administration, had he been president during COVID and the racial unrest, I think he would have done a much better job at least not polarizing people. But I also think that Trump is less the problem than a symptom of problems other people may be missing and wrongly believe are just sort of going to disappear.
Oh, I agree. He's a symptom. I agree. He's a symptom, but I agree with that. I just feel that think that he that his behavior his public behavior is such that that we really just can't. I feel like we've just swam through the depths of the abnormal, and that we need to get back to normal before we can then fix anything, right? We're not going to fix anything in an environment like this going on another 4 years. That's why to me that it actually wasn't difficult at all, right? I mean, it wasn't like, and I'm not a big fan of Joe Biden, and I certainly don't like. Listen, if an Eisenhower Republican had run for president, I would have voted for him. Right?
Well, I think you and I also agreed in private conversation that had Tulsi Gabbard won the Democratic primary,
I would have been a lot happier.
Had Andrew Yang won the Democratic primary, which is crazy from someone who has been very libertarian. I would have had no trouble deciding to vote that ticket.
Yeah.
I just think Joe Biden is just a moderate in all the problematic ways.
Yeah, no, I think the main problem is his age and the fact that he's probably simply not as strong as he was in terms of insisting and resisting and all that sort of thing. And so, it's going to be the early appointments, the early cabinet appointments are going to be a real indicator of whether I gambled right or whether the right wingers were right, and that his administration is basically going to be run from the squad, right? I mean, that's sort of we just don't know yet, but. To me, that dice roll within the frame of a normal is still better than having what I just viewed as a complete deranged nightmare.
And that's fair, and I'll go along with almost all of that, except because it just pains me to almost feel like I have to defend Trump in some.
No, I don't ever I didn't take you at once as just defending Trump. I don't think that that's it at all. Listen, we've gone on way long. So I'm going to stop it because the audience only has so much, we can talk for 4 hours, but the audience doesn't want to watch it. Yeah. But I would like to take up separately on another occasion, if you're game, the question of voting for a sure loser. Sure. Versus voting for, what I'm calling a sure loser versus not voting. Sure. Right, because you are absolutely right that I conflated the two in my connecting your history then to this year, and that was an error on my part. And so, but in thinking about it very quickly, I'm thinking I probably would say something similar about voting for a sure loser. So I would like to talk about that on a separate occasion if you're still interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Kevin, thank you so much. And we'll see you the next time around. And I strongly encourage everyone to come read Kevin's stuff at the Electric Agora. It's very good. And it is not in sync with me or anybody else. I mean, he really is independent. And that's exactly the sort of thing that the reason why I have a stable of writers and it's not my blog is because I don't want it to just be my views. Yeah. So I'm very happy to have you. And thank you. All right, man. Take care.
Yeah, you too, Dan.